Cycle and Beatdown are the two main ways to play Clash Royale, and since the dawn of time, we've had Cycle players accusing Beatdown players of being brain dead and no skill, and on the other side, Beatdown players have always accused Cycle players of being boosted and spammers. The premise of heavy decks like these being no skill kind of in a way makes sense when you think about it. Drop tank, drop support, drop spell, break tower. And the idea of Cycle decks like these being spam makes sense as well. Like, I don't know what's going on here, and quite frankly I'm willing to bet my soul at the fact that the guy playing also has no clue what's happening and is just spamming random cards. To an outsider, this argument probably sounds like but as a Clash Royale player, you must fall into one of these two groups. I'm here to present the case in a hopefully non-biased way and try to get the real answer of the question, Cycle versus Beatdown. Which one is actually skillful? To answer this, we need to know how both archetypes work and what's the upsides of each of them. Beatdown decks tend to worry about how to break through and how to make a push that gets on tower, while Cycle decks tend to worry about defending because their method of getting tower damage is more direct. In other words, Beatdown decks rely more on macro skills like making decisions, counting card cycle, and potentially counting elixir. And Cycle decks rely more on micro skills which involve more timing and position sensitive matters. That's not to say Cycle decks don't need to count card cycles, cause you would be dumb to go Royal Hogs Archer Queen when they have Evo Volk in Cycle. And I'm also not saying that Beatdown decks don't need timing in their gameplay, it's just some skills matter more to some decks. Also, both archetypes spam their win condition first play if they can. People seem to accept something like Wall Breaker's Miner as first play, but there's stigma around something like Lava Hound first play. I'm gonna go on a round here and ask, how is Hog Rider Ice Golem first play acceptable, but Golem first play is somehow dirty and hated? Shouldn't it be the opposite because Hog Rider Ice Golem require an immediate response and is cheaper so you can't punish it, while Golem first play is probably the easiest way for your opponent to lose their tower? Is this like some sort of a propaganda? Sorry, went off topic because double standards piss me off, but anyways, let's start with the advantage of Cycle decks. The first advantage, Homeland advantage. What I mean by this is if I play a typical giant push and count how long it stays on the enemy side, it will end up being too long that I can't fit the whole push over this voice line. But when I play a Hog Rider push, chances are the push is over before the voice line is, and I might literally have to leave some dead space over this voice line. The reason that's an advantage is obviously the more time you are on the enemy side, the more shots their tower does, which is basically just free DPS for them. Especially if they have King Tower activated, then it becomes extremely difficult to push and break through. This could be the main reason why inexperienced players struggle against siege decks, because it feels like they are playing without any towers. Besides tower advantage, you get to surround splash units and have more flexible options when it comes to positioning. Kiting and other forms of control are all only possible if the action is happening on your own side of the arena. Don't mind me completely lying straight to your face here, but I guess you can tell this is an exception, not the rule. The second advantage, anti-starting hand. If you're unfamiliar with it, start handing someone is basically doing something really stupid at the start of the match, like Lumberloon on the bridge first second. People usually do this in hopes that your air counters are out of rotation and possibly even the last couple of cards in your deck. Now, as a Cycle player, if you get Lumberloon first second in a game, you can play a few cheap cards to get to your Tesla and stop the push with low or even no damage. But as a Beatdown player, if your hand looks like this, then to be honest, you just gotta accept that you lost your tower. Sure, you could play your small spell in hopes that your Phoenix isn't your lost card, but it's not worth the risk. In this situation, you're probably better off dumping all your stuff on the opposite lane and hoping your tower trade works out fine. The third advantage, cycling evolutions. Beatdown decks can use evolutions. It's not like the mechanic is disabled for heavy decks, but the main issue lies in how the evolutions are designed. See? It literally has the word cycle in it. Taking Firecracker as an example, you start with a normal Firecracker and you have to play it twice before getting to your evolved version of the card, and Cycle decks can get back to their Firecracker much quicker than a beatdown player does. The issue was kind of half solved by making beatdown cards like the Wizard only require one cycle, which makes it less of a problem, but realistically it doesn't really solve the issue entirely. To be honest here, I didn't physically test while typing the script, but I'm almost 100% sure that getting to a 2-cycle Firecracker evolution as a cycle deck will be much easier than getting to a 1-cycle Wizard evolution as a beatdown deck would be. And if we compare a more extreme example like Skeleton evolutions to Royal Recruit evolutions, it becomes much worse due to the cost difference, as it's bigger than 3 Elixir Firecracker versus a 5 Elixir Wizard. Besides, what's stopping a cycle player from using Wizard evolution and abusing the heck out of both his quick cycle and the fact that the Wizard is more easy to evolve? And I don't think I have to explain why this is a big deal. We all know evolutions are just more broken versions of the card for the same cost, so playing more of them is a clear advantage in the game. The fourth advantage: outcycling counters. Outcycling is a term used when you get, for example, your Goblin Barrel before they get their log, therefore you outcycled their log. Having a faster cycle means if a Hog player played their Hog and had it die to a mini P.E.K.K.A, they can just bop, 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 and boom, that's another Hog Rider before the enemy gets back to their mini P.E.K.K.A. A Giant player, for example, would get their Giant destroyed by a mini P.E.K.K.A and then would have to play multiple expensive cards to get back to their Giant, only to see that the enemy has his mini P.E.K.K.A again already. Clearly, always having that key card counter in your hand due to a faster cycle is an incredible advantage that one can't underestimate. Especially if the enemy has multiple cards that gets countered by the same card, then if you have a very quick cycle, you can use that counter on both of them at the same time. The fifth advantage: spell cycling. Normally when you start the game, both you and your opponent have full HP tower, so technically there is no advantage state. Unless one of you two is playing a cycle deck, then that person would be able to cycle their spells much quicker when overtime is starting to come close to an end. Any cycle player is automatically at a constant advantage against any beatdown player if they are at the similar damage or even slightly lower in damage. This results in a case where the beatdown player has to constantly approach to prevent his slow, inevitable death to overtime, while the cycle players can just defend and slowly damage down the tower because they know they are winning the race unless they mess up on defense. And in Clash Royale, usually the player that starts first loses the game, as defense is way stronger and far more superior than offense. The sixth advantage: spell value. As a cycle player, your small cheap cards don't give up that much spell value. For example, having 2 or 3 of your cards get caught in a poison often results in an equal trade, which is bad but not the end of the world. But if you face a beatdown player, clipping like just 1 card in your poison mostly gives you an equal trade. Clipping 2 or more cards is an instant double the value, which isn't really that hard because a beatdown push would have to consist of more than one single troop. Not to mention, having a spell as a cycle player gives you free tower damage if the enemy invests and it plays a unit in the back, which would scare them off from playing in the back, so the pushes would become less effective as they would generally bank less elixir from them if they do that. The seventh advantage: 3-card cycle. We all know you can't have 2 of the same champion deployed at the same time. Instead of putting the champion in your hand but grayed out, which what they should have done, Clash Royale decided it would be completely out of your card rotation, which makes it so you are playing with just 7 cards as long as the champion isn't dead. Literally take anything I talked about regarding outcycling and turn it up to 11. You can get your win conditions much quicker now. You can get the necessary counters much quicker too. Spell cycling starts looking like a meme. Bro, how do you even counterplay this crap, dude? Hell, you can even deploy 2 royal deliveries with 1 elixir bar. How is that even possible? 3-card cycle is a thing in beatdown too, but your champion will die before you get a full rotation because of how slow your cycle is. Whereas with cycle decks, you probably could go over your cards multiple times if you can protect your champion well enough. Alright, enough attacking cycle decks. I'm pretty sure some people are very offended. So now let's go over beatdown advantages. The first advantage: comeback mechanics. Normally, cycle players lose an entire game with the moment they lose their tower. Their win conditions are usually very slow at dealing damage. It's almost impossible for them to recover, let alone win a 2-tower game. But a golem player could lose his first tower, then lose his second tower, and then have his king be at like negative HP, and then he will go like, alright, that's winnable, bro. Like, bro, do you not see your oh, it just took 1 push. The second advantage: Pocket power. The word pocket is often used to refer to this space that opens after you break your enemy tower. Deploying cards here is called playing said card in the pocket. This pocket is more useful to beat down players than it is for cycle players for many reasons. First of all, it exposes enemy buildings as it would allow you to play things directly on top of them, which kills the whole point of them. It also allows you to split your push in a way that would make it stronger against splashing troops or prevent you from giving them extra spell value. And you can also play something to tank for a counter push, as it's instant, people might be caught off guard by it. The third advantage: less decisions. Your card as a beatdown player costs about an average of 4 elixir. Given that you get 1 elixir every around 3 seconds, that's roughly dropping 1 card every 12 seconds. The less decisions you get to make during the match gives you time to think more about your strategy and kinda chill and relax. Compared to Cycle, where they play cards like 2 to 3 times more frequently than a beatdown player, you might need to play the game too much to have some interactions go on autopilot. This is also why it's easier to pick up a beatdown deck, because all you have to do against an average non-pro player is take a 3-card combo from some YouTuber and place them in a specific order. Sure, playing this stupidly against pros doesn't work, but most of the time, people don't care about ranks and want an easier deck to play. Also, playing cards less frequently would mean you get less hurt by card drawing cooldown. Card drawing cooldown is the time it takes for you to receive your next card, and honestly it only becomes an issue when you are playing a very fast cycle deck in like an infinite elixir modifier. It may be a tiny bit noticeable in triple elixir if you have a quick deck like 2.6, which is why I'm mentioning it, but it isn't a massive deal breaker. The fourth advantage: side control. Beatdown pushes aim towards taking an entire tower in 1 or 2 pushes at most. Cycle decks, on the other hand, tend to slowly chip down the tower for a few hundred damage multiple times per match. This means if a beatdown player dealt like 500 damage to one of the towers and had to switch attacking to the other lane, it wouldn't be a big issue for them. But a cycle player switching away from the tower they were chipping is very taxing and often would lose them the entire game. This is where beatdown players have an advantage, because if your tower gets a bit damaged from some royal hogs, it can turn to an advantage state for you. Simply play your Sparky in the back on your weaker tower side, as you switching your attacking lane hurts the cycle player more than it hurts you. The units you keep playing in the back of your weaker towers act as a permanent push blocker, as no one in his right mind will play their royal hogs into an electro dragon. It's mostly a general rule that cycle players would want to go opposite lane, as they play a punish playstyle and would force a beatdown player to use their elixir on defense rather than offense. This whole trick falls apart if they have a spell that would get value on your defensive troop, so just use your head and think. Speaking of spells, in double and triple elixir you can force cycle players to keep defending the weaker tower side the whole time. While you might not break through or get any damage, your spells will provide more value, as it would be more likely for you to clip the tower and some defensive units, since they will have to deploy stuff to defend. And on the other end of the stick, they can't really clip your tower, as the fight is happening very far away from it. So if they want to spell cycle, they will end up having to rocket blanks and be very down on elixir from doing that, which is an auto win. Bro is not defending this push, I'll tell you that. The fifth advantage: damage efficiency. Let's say you have 0 elixir and got caught with your pants down. A cycle player will maybe play a princess at the bridge and get a few hits on your tower for around, what, 700 damage before you get enough elixir to respawn. A beatdown player can play a prince or something to that extent, which would easily take down your entire tower on its own. The general idea I'm hinting at is at single elixir, beatdown cards and decks have much higher damage potential if you catch a cycle player lacking. A single good spell exchange or an overcommitment from them and the game is all yours. You just gotta know how to force out such things. I say single elixir because in double and triple elixir you can generate elixir very quickly, and we know that beatdown cards get countered easily for positive elixir trades. This logic is why beatdown matches are more likely to end at the 3-minute mark and not go to overtime, because most games end in a 1-0 score. Cycle decks tend to always go to overtime and be very time consuming archetype to play with when it comes to how long a game takes. For the average Joe like you and me, this means nothing. For top players it would arguably mean they get to play more games if the season is about to end, meaning they have better chances at pushing to the top. And I guess it makes pushing crown related events easier, as beatdown decks sometimes can get 3 crowns and have faster games on average. Now that I'm done looking at the upsides of both archetypes, here is my final judgment. Lava Hound decks are skill. Elixir Golem decks are skill. Golem decks are skill. And before any cycle player gets a stroke, 2.6 is skill, Expo is skill, and Logbait is skill. There isn't a single deck you can create in this game that is no skill, as the skill doesn't really depend on the deck you are running, but depends on another factor, and it is matchups. Let's take a look at Hawk 2.6, and that's a deck that is specifically designed to counter beatdown decks, or at least it feels like it because it has all the tools to defend and pressure them perfectly. Now, if you are a beatdown player and claim that 2.6 is a brain dead, zero skill deck, you would be partially correct, as the matchup is really stupid that it isn't fair. But your wording would be where your logic is flawed, as beating Lava Hound Miner Lightning decks with 2.6 would require you an insane amount of skill, since Musketeer is your only air counter. Another example is Expo, which usually has an amazing matchup against Lava Hound decks because they don't have much ground cards to actually block the Expo, so it's free tower locks. And with their quick cycle, they can easily spam Teslas and dominate the match, which is why I would accept 100% if a Lava player says Expo is no skill. But then you have the Giant Graveyard matchup, making Expo the most skillful deck on existence if you manage to win that matchup. Like, the Giant Graveyard player has got to be an actual bot to lose such a matchup, because that deck is sometimes literally used by pros to snipe Expo, as it's a free win. And the examples can keep going on and on forever. I guess what I'm trying to say is we as a community are ignorant for calling an entire deck no skill. Instead, we should become more mature and realize that the core issue is just the matchups. Now this will upset a few people, but cycle decks on average tend to have less polarizing matchups in general, so realistically I think it would be fair to say that they are relatively lower skill than beatdown decks. Am I biased here, or does my logic make sense, my dudes?